Hi, evening everyone. Welcome to tonight's Environment Scrutiny Committee. Just as a reminder of kind of housekeeping, so the meeting's being broadcast live on YouTube and is being recorded. If you're not speaking yourself, if you could mute yourself just for background and sound quality, that would be brilliant. If you'd like to speak, if you could use the hand up feature just so I know if you would like to speak. We've got two presentations on the agenda tonight, so without further ado, I'll move on swiftly, but thank you everybody for attending this evening. So first on the agenda, have we received any apologies for absence?
No. We haven't, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I know Councillor Offland has said that she might be a little bit late this evening, so hopefully she'll be arriving soon. Any declarations of interest for items on the agenda? No, super. Agenda item 3, so minutes of the previous meeting. So these have been circulated ahead of the meeting. Are there any comments or questions or any amendments which you would like to be made? We all see. Oh, looks like it's Gemma.
I'm happy to move them, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Boylan. Have we got a seconder for the minutes? I'm quite happy. Oh, thank you, Councillor Holt. The moved and second, we're all in favour of the minutes. Super, brilliant. Right, agenda item 4 then. We're receiving a report, well, kind of a presentation really on the recovery reform reset kind of programme which is taking place at the moment. So, and Dean Sargent is with us tonight to talk us through that alongside Councillor Healy as well. And Val, I'm guessing, is also for this agenda item. Yeah. So just in regards to the presentation, would you rather have questions at the end or as we go along? Do you have a preference?
Chair, I think we're happy to take questions as we go along, if that's okay with everybody.
Okay, super. I'll hand over to you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Am I okay just to share my screen just to go through the presentation? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Chair?
absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So just do that. Hopefully that's come up now, if everyone can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, as I said, we're joined by Val and Harsh as key members of the Environment and Infrastructure thematic group as part of the Recovery, Reform and Reset programme. So I was just going to set the scene in terms of introduction and then hand over to Val and Harsh just to give a bit more detail on the environmental aspects that feature very much at the heart of our environmental and infrastructure thematic group, and then I'll just wrap up at the end. So just in terms of the environment and infrastructure thematic group, so that very much forms part of the council-wide recovery, reform and reset programme. We do have a core sort of officer and cabinet member group that does meet on a monthly basis to sort of develop the progress and monitor the actions that we've set out in our action plan. And this slide here really sets out our 9 priorities. So these are the priorities that we started off with as part of the kind of recovery program from COVID-19 through the summer as part of lockdown, or post-lockdown, should I say. So we have the 9 priorities there, which tackling highway pinch points at the top, linked very much into the infrastructure aspects, and the 3 in the middle there, which is the green infrastructure recovery, net zero carbon transition, as well as providing safe access to retail, leisure and tourist destinations, being a key part of our environmental theme. We then, as time's moved on through the remainder of 2020, we've rationalised our 9 priorities in lieu of some of those that have perhaps been delivered in some respects, and we've now focused on 3 key areas or priorities of reform, and that is infrastructure reform and green recovery, and obviously connectivity underpinning all of that. So we do have those three key priorities now that will really focus our reform process as part of this thematic group. So tonight we're just due to give you an overview of our as I said, the environmental aspect. So this will focus on the green infrastructure recovery and the transition to net carbon zero. So we'll just hand over to Val, if that's okay, Val.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. So in terms of then picking up how it's affected us, it's appropriate to think about each little aspect. It's a very changing landscape that COVID-19 has brought upon us in terms of the way we live, work and play. It's all changed. And when we're returning to that degree of normality, it will be very different from in our lives in terms of before what the pandemic brought along. Home working is one of them in terms of the government's decision, the direction to work from home where possible, and as a result of social distancing and restrictions on travel. It's also raised awareness in terms of space standards within homes, within gardens, and what's accessible to us. And then also broadband as an infrastructure that's absolutely essential to enable us to work from home. In addition, it's brought in an increasingly local perspective with both physical and global lives which have been contracted. It's highlighted the shortcomings with the space that we live in the green poverty, and looking at inequalities across both the borough and across the nation, and raising the appetite for local green spaces. It's also had an impact in terms of mental and physical health. The period of lockdown has been associated with physical and mental health risks to those that are confined to their homes, or those that disproportionately affected the mental and physical health of those that from the more disadvantaged communities and those who live alone or without any access to gardens, balconies or green space. There's a need to look at reduced carbon consumption, with businesses and industries temporarily closing down or the reduction in production. The restrictions on travel, there's been a significant reduction in carbon emissions, and that was highlighted quite early on in terms of then how should we return to work. There's also a government commitment to develop smarter rules to safeguard our green spaces. There's a need for a systematic approach to developing and linked in networks of nature recovery and green spaces within our area and across the country that provide resilience and mitigation against climate change, building in biodiversity and supporting the rewilding where appropriate, and provide all of the other population with the mental and physical well-being benefits that they need. Okay. So as the first point is looking at how we can address this through the planning system. There's evidence specifically that we've witnessed that we need to address, and improving sustainability, improving that increased resilience and increasing the driving sustainability for the zero carbon and being more inclusive. So first of all, it's about how we look at our local plan and how we can negotiate schemes specifically to deliver things that perhaps our building regulations don't cover, and actually designing in holistically at the outset. So first of all is looking at energy through both low carbon and zero carbon technologies, looking at layouts to reduce energy demands, so in terms of where orientations of properties are located, looking at site layouts, distances from properties, distances in terms of our green space, how the infrastructure is that's built on the site in terms of looking at the transport and movement links with the wider area, promoting our rights of way, promoting active travel and cycle routes and bus subsidies and travel plans, and the provision of electric vehicle charging points. It's about making that an affordable choice and safe transport options. Then we're also looking at water conservation and sustainable drainage solutions, increasing tree planting and looking at permeable surfacing, and then multifunctional urban green spaces. Looking at the use of our materials in construction and our waste management, looking at the flexibility and adaptability of buildings, and then also looking at how we can develop and promote off-site contributions, which will also be supported by biodiversity net gain. Then moving forward in terms of the long term, it's about collection of evidence through the local plan review, evidence and viability through the implementation of these ideas at this moment, and then the creation of any supplemental planning documents, which will be specific and give us greater weight when determining our applications. Okay. Then in terms of engagement with locals, we've developed My World Telford, which is a social media feed on Twitter, which is about engagement with the local residents in terms of pushing and what is available on their doorstep that perhaps they weren't aware of. So this was launched in May 2020. We were developing the idea prior to, but it's gained weight because of the need to communicate and engage with our locals. They've made quite a few impressions across the board, and if we look at some of the benefits or some of the tweets that we've done, there's a slide there which looks at benefits of nature to our well-being, which gives you an example in terms of how we're also trying to tackle it through mental and physical health, and not just about biodiversity. And just to give you another example, there's a couple of tweets there in terms of our engagement even for Christmas, what's available on their doorstep and how to interact, and there's an example in terms of the Telford 50. Which leads me then on to thinking about Telford 50 and the 50-mile route. We then started to look at our promotion of our rights of way and how we engage to be able to make sure that people are aware again of what's available on their doorstep. So the first of all, we've launched, or will launch tomorrow, our definitive map. Now this is a statement which was last published in 1965, and as you can imagine, it's had hundreds of modifications over the years, especially being a new town. Now Telford and Wrekin has over 1,000 individual rights of way that provides access for over 400 kilometres of pedestrians, cyclists, horse riders, carriage drivers, and the network is roughly divided between 50-50 between both paths in the rural area and the urban areas. So we're legally required to hold this map, and tomorrow we'll see a new definitive map coming forward, which is timely, it's available online, and it's accessible. Alongside this, we are launching a definitive map modification order policy and process, which will go into consultation tomorrow. And that will then look at appropriately dealing with the defined approach to modification, the definitive modification order applications. It will be able to be transparent and detailed online, and it will be able to promote routes of rights of way. Adjacent to this, we're also launching consultation, which is around categorisation of the rights of way. Now, rights of way are recorded within the definitive map fall within 4 classifications of footpath, bridleway, restricted byway, and byway to open to all. However, there's no standard specifications or maintenance criteria in respect of those. So what we're looking at now in terms of bringing in something about categorisation in terms of how important those routes are, understanding how the public use these routes, and being able to then look at how we can improve those, how we prioritise maintenance, and how we look at investments, and we can utilise things like our Section 106 contributions towards this, and this acts as evidence for its promotion. Okay. Then we've started to look at our actual green space and how it's valued. First of all, we started off looking at our local nature reserves and recreation. And there's actually some good information that we've been able to gather in terms of how popular our LNRs are. And they receive 3.6 million visitors a year. 2.4 million visits are made by active travel, and 1.2 are made by the car. So knowing these things, we can start to then think about how we can actually create some of these in terms of promoting other routes, in terms of, again, promoting that active travel. We can also look in terms of how many visits they've received over the years. And there's 1.1 1 million visits that are made by individuals who have never visited the LNRs before, and 2.4 are repeat visitors. And then in terms of the LNR value, we've been able to calculate, and I'll go through the calculations in a little bit in a minute, in terms of that welfare value, and that's of £12.4 million per year. Well, the welfare itself is calculated by Orville, which is a programme that draws on data how people use green space. Now, welfare value is a monetary estimate of the extra welfare that's gained from being able to access a site, effectively how much we would need to spend to be able to get the same welfare if that green space didn't exist. So then we started to look at the local nature reserves and the value of net gain. Now, biodiversity net gain is an approach to development and land management that aims to leave natural environment in a measurable or better state than before. It looks at different habitats, and they're given different biodiversity units based on their quality and connectivity, etc. And these units give a common numerical standard to compare sites, site quality, and then being able to effectively broker habitat enhancement fees. So in terms of Telford's LNRs itself, this consists of circa 7,000 biodiversity units, so it's 12 biodiversity units per hectare. And the Town Park, the Arkle, Granville, Ranley Valley all support those highest numbers. We've also got, and then that's then broken down into the woodland, grassland, wetlands, and heath and scrub. Effectively, we've got £75 million worth of biodiversity units, which equates to, within the borough, and that equates to £135,000 per hectare. Okay. Then we started to look at the value of our woodlands. Now, Telford's got a big canopy cover. The canopy cover across the borough is estimated to be about 15%, and that's higher than the national average. The distribution is not even within the urban canopy cover, and it's estimated at 49% within the urban area, and the rural canopy cover is estimated at 8%. Within the ward level data, that's got a very different range. Canopy cover is approximately 22.4%, ranging from Edgemond, its lowest, which is 8%, and the highest at 55% around Ironbridge Gorge. Land ownership and protection, we've got 27% of the borough of the borough's canopy is actually owned by Telford and Wrekin Council, and 63% of it is of this of land owned by Telford and Wrekin Council is actually wooded. Telford and Wrekin Council also protect 682 hectares of accessible woodlands across 17 nature reserves and 200 green guarantee sites. The Woodland Trust estimates that this is about 70% of residents within Telford and 20% of residents within the Wrekin constituents are within 500 metres of accessible woodland. 77% of those households in Telford and Wrekin are within 500 metres of woodland that's protected by Telford and Wrekin Council. And on average, every household in Telford and Wrekin is within 100 metres of 62 trees, and that helps us to. This figure helps us to understand and engage and communicate what a forest community looks like, what we strive to be. It's also going to allow us to start looking at tree density per population, and we start to link that with then social deprivation, health and well-being, etc. And we've got some powerful messages that we can target interventions. So we then start to look at targeted planting, and in terms of DEFRA's 25-year environmental plan sets a target of 12% tree cover by 2060, and the Committee on Climate Change sets a target of 17 to 19% tree cover by 2050. So we will be combining various data sets relating to the canopy cover to set targets and plan a spatial and temporal delivery. Okay, so then looking at carbon sequestration, 15% of the borough is wooded, so that means also gives us a sequestration rate on average, which is equivalent to 36,500 tonnes of carbon sequestration per year. And that's actually got a value in terms of a pound value, which is of 2.4 million of non-traded carbon per year. 27% of the woodland in the borough is actually owned by TWC, and the sequestration rate is therefore around about 10,000, 11,000, sorry. And that has a value of £706,000 of non-traded carbon per year. That effectively means that we would then be able to calculate what Telford and Wrekin itself needs in terms of carbon sequestration, and if there's any spare value that's left, then other companies, etc., or parties will be able to buy in to that carbon sequestration value to be able to offset any of their emissions. Okay. Now I'll pass over to Harj.
Thank you. As mentioned before, due to COVID-19, the immediate economic uncertainty exposed social, environmental and economic inequalities. Funding that therefore has been utilised to focus on both the immediate recovery actions as well as an opportunity to rethink economic growth and pave the way for a green recovery. So the council is leading the recovery process and acting as an enabler, confidence builder in the local economy. Therefore, the council has promoted energy efficiency grants and schemes for renovations and retrofits, including improved insulation and heating. The council itself are implementing a programme of retrofit schemes across council-owned buildings. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And then people, officers as well, working from home for the foreseeable future. There will also be a long-term impact on the demand for office space. So the council rethinking our existing office space and what that also means in regards to energy consumption. And in regards to planning, we're looking at strategic decisions that are being made that can drive the green recovery. For example, through the local plan review, we're going to identify natural flood management approaches and sustainable drainage systems, SUDS, to increase carbon sequestration. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Harj. So hopefully that's just giving you kind of background really to the environmental aspects of this thematic group. It's very much being around that kind of baseline mapping and setting really. We have seen the launch of the My Wild Telford that Val gave an overview of, as well as the aspects around the public rights of way and definitive mapping network as well. So we are sort of kind of laying the foundations, I guess, for that kind of green recovery and net zero carbon transition as part of our climate change commitments. What all this means is underpinning us as a place leader, a leader of place, and obviously in doing that, engaging with the communities and stakeholders, businesses, to kind of bring them along and support them and support us in promoting our green infrastructure and really kind of setting that vision going forward. So that concludes the formal presentation. Happy to hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thank you all for that presentation. It's very, very in-depth. There's lots of facts and figures there for us to get our head around. I'll open it up if there's any questions from committee members. Oh, we're silent. It's very rare. Go on, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we could. I think that would be entirely wrong and a democratic oversight if we were regarded as silent on any matter in scrutiny, to be perfectly honest. I think we put a generous interpretation on what we've heard, which is that we have only heard a thematic overview in a very, very broad brush sense, and that it's picking up a range of green nice to haves, essentials to have, but nice to have. So, I mean, Jay, you did say there were facts and figures. Actually, yeah, there was some statistics. There's no numeric targets in there at all. There's absolutely no measurables or deliverables at all, and no numeric targets. So, but I accept that it is only a thematic overview, and that the meat will follow in due course, and we will need that, because otherwise we'll have no means of measuring whether the council actually is achieving anything rather than description. So that's the first thing. Then there are one or two individual points. I would ask Val, what are Sparta rules? Because that was mentioned fairly early in your presentation, or at least that's what I heard, and I don't know what that is. Then there were a number of other positive things. I think the impact of COVID will be very granular. I think if you work in public administration, you've had one COVID experience. If you work in retail, you've had quite an education, you've had a quite different experience. I think for some people, yes, there will be an opportunity for profound change, and for other people, there'll be an opportunity for no change at all. And certainly my observation of the M54 has been, there has been no change at all. In terms of the value of local nature reserves and other green space that serves the same function, like Norbury Park or Strine Valley Park in Newport, I profoundly agree. They are of deep, deep value to the people. You mentioned that a financial value to the individual could be put on what they had to pay were they to buy that. And I would make this point that the great majority of residents do pay for it. It is a paid for service. It is not free. We pay for it. We're taxed for it, in fact, whether we use it or not. So we're going to be very cautious about saying this is what people are getting for free. No, we're not. We pay tax for local nature reserves and everything else the council does. So to round out, I'm curious to what Sparta is. I'm disappointed but not surprised that Newport's got a very low canopy of trees. I think I knew that. It's a shame, therefore, our green space is going to get built on. I think the point about the local plan is very well made, but there is no mention of the balance between houses and jobs. And there's no mention, in fact, in the local plan of reducing the number of houses which we're facing, particularly in Newport, which is not really balanced by jobs. So people will be commuting by car on the A41. Otherwise, certainly the public rights of way, excellent. Very glad to see that. Way overdue. The focus on Wild Telford is very good. Only I'm disappointed that it's solely available through Twitter in engagement, because that's a deeply self-selecting and narrow demographic. It needs to be much, much more widely available than solely through Twitter, please. That's not a criticism of the Wild Telford concept, which I think is outstanding and excellent. I thoroughly approve. I would do, because we've got a significant triple SI in Newport along the canal, but I would ask that communication channel be widened. But the fundamental is, excellent for thematic, but we need to follow it with the deliverables and numeric targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Healy, did you want to respond?
Yeah, this is kind of an overview, so I think that's right, Tim. But that's what we need to do, is baseline what we've got, which is the work that the officers have been doing as part of the recovery groups. It's understanding where we are now, and therefore, where we need to go to. So all of that work around understanding both the social value, the carbon sequestration value, the biodiversity value of our open spaces, and also the spatial distribution of them, then allows us to understand, okay, so what do we need to do where? So you're right, but the reason that's how it's been presented is because that's where we are, and obviously that the sort of, then we look at the development from there on in. In terms of my Telford as well, that was started on Twitter, but again, that is something that I raised at the very start about us having that also on other mechanisms and other platforms too, but we wanted to see how it went on one platform to understand the value of it and the engagement before we then look to sort of spread that anywhere else. But what we do is some of the things that are put out on the My Wild Telford Twitter account are then put out via Facebook on the council Facebook account. So some of the information, a lot of the information does get shared in other channels. And then also in the newsletter that we send out to people like Street Champions and also our climate change champions. So the information does go in different ways as well. But clearly, it's a developing engagement tool, and we can look at other platforms as well.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Val, did you want to pick up that comment, the question about something you referenced in your presentation? But what? Sorry, Councillor Nelson, was it Val who said it?
Yeah, maybe I misheard. I heard something called the government Sparta rules, and perhaps it wasn't Sparta, but it's fairly early on.
I can't recall saying Sparta. I've been looking through my own things. In terms of which, do you remember which element it was on? Perhaps I can explain from there.
No, but perhaps that's the perils of a fairly dense and lengthy presentation, which was very professionally delivered. But yeah, I had trouble enough remembering back and noting away what was going on. So not to worry, we can go back through YouTube and pick it up later. No problem.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Holt?
Yeah, I was just curious about how you measure and how you plan to measure the impact on the community. So how you measure who visits our green spaces, how you measure the impact on them, and the impact on the well-being. And certainly, yeah, I agree with the broadening of the advertising, the promoting of the green spaces. I understand that Twitter is a start, but certainly I look forward to it being promoted through other mediums. But how do you measure the impact?
Chair, to answer that, Val?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the measurements, what we're doing various things. So the first one is around the rights of way, which launches this consultation now. So we'll hopefully be able to understand how many people are actually using it in terms of that coming back to us with that information, hence why we're trying to promote it now, where people will be having some downtime as well during Christmas, and there will be out about on those routes. Secondly, then we're looking further into the new year. There's a couple of strategies that we're going forward in terms of looking at a categorisation of our open spaces and categorisation of our recreation areas. So there's a twofold exercise there, one in relation to play and recreation, and one specifically around open space and that quality. So there'll be further studies that will go forward, but that will then give us a base level. From that, we'll come back and look at, in terms of as a council, where we want to be and what our actions are to go forward, because we're looking in terms of appointing external consultants as well that would then be able to assess and perhaps give us some actions that we can take forward. Those will then be utilised within the local plan to be able to drive our strategy and our vision, and again by bringing in opportunities through other funding mechanisms to then being able to support those enhancements. And one of those routes is through Section 106, or what may be the infrastructure levy as that comes forward, and other funding which is available externally.
Thank you for that. Councillor Yankee?
Thank you, Chair. I was just want to refer to the part of the report of our LNRs, and I was really impressed with the figure of the 2.4 million visits that are made using active travel means, but I was equally dismayed, I don't know if that's a bit too strong, of the 1.2 million made by cars, and I was wondering if we would consider as part of the plan to make LNRs more accessible by active travel means. I think it's very much with the theme where places can only be achieved, some places can only be get to by car, but I think if we're going to be looking at improving the infrastructure for active travel means, then enabling easier access via active travel to our LNRs is probably something we should be looking at as well.
Who would like to pick up that point?
I can start if that's okay, Val, Chair. So yeah, very much so. So I think as Val's explained, it's around sort of understanding, who's visiting and how they're getting there, which obviously those figures sort of baseline that really, and understanding a bit more information around where those sort of connectivity gaps may be, around that active travel, and that's again a part of the kind of active and sustainable travel priority as part of this thematic group. So there is that kind of dovetailing associated with this. We're very much looking to, picking up on the earlier point, using this information and looking to grow those visits by more sort of sustainable and active travel means. So now we've got that kind of baseline figure, really, looking at opportunities to increase that and provide those sort of active travel, sustainable travel links to again, promote the usage and what's available.
Thanks, Dean.
If I'm allowed to ask a couple of questions, there's kind of from that presentation, there's a couple of things which kind of popped into my head, and obviously what we've been saying about kind of the outcomes from COVID is that obviously more people are working from home. And it got me thinking, actually, that means obviously there has benefits in terms of carbon production for travelling to work, but actually in terms of carbon produced from our own homes due to heating, due to electricity, that's obviously going to increase. And I'm wondering whether should we as an employer, so as Telford Marine Council, should we be doing it, but also local businesses, partners which we're working with, is there something to be said that actually employers need to be kind of taking a role in terms of making our employees' houses kind of more green, and the carbon production, and thinking from that perspective, because I think we're all cashing in on this idea of, well, people aren't travelling, so therefore there's a carbon reduction, but equally we're all sitting in our homes rather than one office building which we're heating. We're all sitting in individual homes heating those buildings instead. And actually, is that in the long run, is that going to have more of an impact on the environment? And whether, as an employer and as an organisation which is committed to the climate emergency, and what we're doing here tonight as a committee, but generally as a council, do we need to be taking a more active role in that? So that was my first question. I'll leave it at that one, and then I'll come back for the second one. I don't know who would like to pick up that one, but Fliss, are you wanting to respond to that one?
If that's okay, Chair, yes. I was just going to say that when we come on to the discussion later about new ideas to feed into the climate change plan, that is one of the areas we were going to highlight to the committee. So I don't know if you want to perhaps come back to that in a bit. Yeah, that's I think it's a really, really good point, and one we've been wrestling with ourselves. So we could pick that up later if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine by me. My second point was obviously is the kind of R group. Obviously, the economic recovery is going to be central to all of this, and I'm just wondering whether, once again, it's a bit of an off-topic one, but in terms of Telford Land Deal, whether we're considering the kind of the economic recovery alongside the environmental recovery, and whether the land deal can be used as a vehicle for kind of bringing kind of green industries back to Telford, or into Telford, I should say. So could we incentivise through the Telford land deal to bring new green businesses into Telford, and kind of the idea of we're the home of the Industrial Revolution, could we become the home of the Green Industrial Revolution by using the Telford Land Deal to deliver both on our economic recovery but also our environmental recovery?
Yeah, I mean, Val, I don't know if you want to kind of pick anything up around that, particularly with the local plan, etc. But yeah, certainly that's something to consider as part of our, deliverability of sustainable development. And if there's opportunity there through the Telford Land Deal, then I can certainly, director responsible for this thematic group, link in with the director leading on the the economic recovery aspects as well. So yeah, that's certainly something that can be considered. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, Val.
It's definitely supported from a government perspective and national drive, especially from a planning perspective, of trying to bring through new carbon or sustainable sort of technologies coming into play at this moment. Certainly in terms of the infrastructure itself, we'll be looking at that, making that more sustainable too, not just around housing. It is around the economics, around the actual infrastructure of those premises, and we'll be looking in terms of those climate change measures that we can action within the site. Also, we'll be bringing into play things around travel plans, making sure they're fit for purpose with these new employment sites that are coming forward, and making sure that then they're also enforceable. And we're looking in terms of investments as well to drive the employment in industrial approach to environmental sustainability too.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Yankee, I think you got your hand up first, and then we'll go to Councillor Nelson.
Excuse me, Chair, I didn't forgot to put my hand down before.
Oh, apologies. Councillor Nelson? Oh, you're on mute.
Lucky you didn't catch that bit. Actually, I was saying, Chair, that I wanted to support what you've just said. I can't believe I said it either. And in particular, your point about the assets that the borough's got to support, if you like, changing needs that we'll have. And you mentioned green industries, and you mentioned particularly land and the concept of the land deal. And the officer then talked about infrastructure, and travel plans, and then accessibility to land. So that's part of the capability that an employer needs, and that's space. But the other thing they need, and this might be one that we would be picking up later in the action plan, will be skills. Because we can have the land, we can have the travel plan, we can have the access, we have the infrastructure, but is there something that the council can bring to the party in respect of skills, and making sure that the residents and incomers to be living in these new houses that I bash on about have got the skills that are needed for the green revolution you're talking about. So I don't know whether that will be appropriate to raise or not, but I wanted to capture it. Thank you.
I think it's a good point to add. Is there any further questions or comments or anything, Dean or Carolyn or anybody you would like to add?
Nothing for me, Chair.
Councillor Healy?
Yeah, I mean, I think just a couple of points. You mentioned about the sort of people working from home, and of course, as Tim was right at the start of the meeting, not everybody can work from home. The new kind of working practices will clearly be a mixture of some people working from home, and I think even most kind of office type businesses are going to go to a hybrid model, actually, looking at a lot of the discussions that are going on, because there's still some value in that coming together and collaborative working in one place. And I've kind of asked questions about that, about kind of if we're not heating a big building, it's a bit like public transport, isn't it? The idea is that a lot of people on a bus or a train is better than lots of people in individual cars. I think one of the sort of things that a lot of office block type buildings aren't the best insulated. Our own offices are a good example of that. And whereas homes quite often are better insulated, and so actually that might offset, and equally not having the travel. So there's definitely a piece of work around it, and I know that other authorities are doing work around calculating that. I'm sure government are looking at it as well. So it's something we can feed into in terms of our thinking. And then the other sort of final point I wanted to make really was, when in the presentation, Val obviously talked about the value of our existing land and its existing value in terms of carbon sequestration. One of the things that we're not doing, and we've said this before, and I just want to reiterate it, whilst we're measuring that existing value, we are not using it as part of our route to carbon neutrality. It's existing, it's already there. So a new woodland, that's additional. We would count that as part of our route to zero. But that existing woodland isn't. It's already doing a job now, and we wouldn't want to. I feel that would be double counting. That does contrast with Shropshire Council, who've just produced their plan, who actually have included their existing landholding as part of their offset, which I think is cheating. But there you go.
But fortunately, we're not going to join with them, so that's okay.
Just to kind of continue on that point, and I I'm going to guess the answer is yes, but just for my own clarity more than anything. But obviously you raised about the idea of green poverty kind of across the country, but also within the borough. So I assume the piece of work which has been done in regards to the green poverty, where there's less coverage, more coverage and so on, is also going to feed into kind of further planting schemes, so that those two pieces of work kind of marry up together to kind of solve two birds with one stone, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because clearly the north of the borough is less wooded, but equally the north of the borough is where you have the wheeled moors, which are wetland habitats. You wouldn't necessarily want to put a lot of trees. What you might want to do is re-wet big large areas of that land potentially. There's clearly an agricultural use for lots of it as well. So, but it's about planting trees in the right places that provides the right habitat. And I think that's why the measurements that have been done don't just measure the value of trees and woodlands, but also of grasslands and of wetlands, because they all have a role to play in capturing carbon. And so it's understanding what that is across the piece. And whilst the data sets that Val put up in the presentation included the woodland, we've got the data sets on the other as well. So it's the right thing in the right place. But I think certainly there is still some opportunities for increasing woodland cover in the north of the borough.
I think it would be interesting to see, obviously, yeah, taking into account what you said, obviously there's other uses of land, but to see kind of which, I'm guessing as a council, I'm interested in like which residential areas actually really lack that green infrastructure of whatever kind it might be, not necessarily, you know, woods, but where does it lack and what can we do as a council? Because obviously I suspect if you overlaid kind of green poverty, you know, poor mental health, I suspect that those areas probably match up. I am guessing, I do not know, but it would be interesting to see, or do a piece of work to see whether they did correlate in that way, and therefore is there action which needs to be taken to do something about that. Councillor Nelson, is your hand up because you want to speak again, or is it just up?
I think I've got the Yankee hand.
Oh, okay. Bro, is there any further comments from anybody? No. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Haj, Val, and Dean. If you wish to stay, you are more than welcome, or you can escape if you so wish. Entirely up to you. But thank you for your time, and I think it's posed some really interesting questions and kind of avenues, which I think as a committee we might want to explore further. So that's been really beneficial. So thank you. Right. So next agenda item 5 is the climate change update, which Fliss is very kindly going to lead us through, I believe. So. Fliss, is it the same again with presentation? Would you like questions at the end or as we go through, or it's entirely up to you?
I'm quite happy to take questions as we go through, Chair. I'm afraid it is another presentation, but I will try and make it quite short and snappy, as you've had quite a bit of PowerPoint tonight. So just bear with me while I share this.
No problem.
Thank you.
Right, if you can let me know when you can see this.
We can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So I've been asked tonight to give you just a short update on progress with our work on climate change, which I'll try and whiz through, because actually the main item that I've been asked to cover is a discussion around the fact that we are updating our action plan, ready to bring it back to Cabinet in February next year. And so wanted to give members of the committee the opportunity to feed in to the action plan and to make any suggestions for any new actions that you feel you would like to see incorporated into the plan. And to help inform that, what we thought would be quite useful would be to share some results from a piece of engagement we did back in the summer with our residents, and we asked them some questions about climate change, and we thought that'd be quite useful in terms of setting the scene for that discussion item as well. So just to recap, we declared a climate emergency back in July of last year, and that set out a clear aim for the council's operations to be carbon neutral by 2030, and also an aspiration for the borough to also be carbon neutral by the same date. As you'll know, we brought forward our Becoming Carbon Neutral Action Plan in February of this year, and there was also a new priority put into the council plan that was published in October of this year, which clearly set out that the council intended to play a leading role in addressing the climate emergency. So in terms of delivery, since we published our action plan in February, despite all the challenges we've had this year, so we've had flooding, quickly followed by the COVID pandemic, I think we're very committed to continuing to deliver the actions that we'd set out in that climate change plan, because it is a climate emergency, and therefore we felt that whatever else we had to deprioritise because of COVID, we wanted to continue this work. So I'm pleased to say that a lot of the actions that were in the plan for the next couple of years have been delivered already, and there's just a few examples on this slide here, and I'm just going to highlight a few of those in a little bit more detail. So the first area I'm going to talk about is the fact that we have purchased, and you may have seen this, 6 new electric vans that will be out and about in the borough, and for each one of those vans there's about a 1 tonne emissions saving. And as in parallel with that, what we've also done is commissioned the Energy Saving Trust to do a piece of work to look at our wider fleet, and we do think there is potential to actually replace more of our vehicles with electric vehicles moving forward. The second one I want to highlight here is the Sustainable Buildings project. So I don't know if you can see that photo very clearly, but that is actually the roof of Telford Ice Rink. And what we've been doing over the last few months is retrofitting a number of our buildings. Harge mentioned this earlier, and we've been putting on solar panels onto our buildings, but also installing LED lighting. And these are really good win-win projects, because as well as delivering quite a good reduction of emissions, as you can see from the slide there, it also leads to cost savings, and we get grant funding for these projects as well. So in this case, there was 60% grant funding for the capital cost of that scheme at the ice rink. So really, really good schemes, and we want to continue to do more of that. The third one that I want to highlight on here is, again, we've heard quite a lot about habitats tonight, and one of the things that we want to focus on is to enhance about 70 hectares of our habitat in order to store carbon, and that's equally important as reducing emissions. And one of the projects that we've piloted with a view to doing more in 2021 is a scheme where we cut some species-rich grassland from one of our local nature reserves, and we actually spread the hay at another site, and that in itself will store 9 tonnes of carbon. As well as actions we've taken to reduce the council's own carbon footprint, there's quite a lot of activity that we've been doing to actually tackle climate change in the community. So you might have seen that we recently launched an initiative called Trees for TW, where we've made about 8,500 trees available for residents, organisations, landowners to come forward and apply for some trees, which will be distributed in January. And it was an incredibly popular initiative. We had to close the scheme early because we were at risk of being oversubscribed. And it's really generated a lot of discussion and awareness raising in the community. So that's been a really popular scheme. Another key way that we can obviously have an impact is by working with our contractors, and I'm pleased to say that both ID Verdi and Veolia now have carbon reduction action plans in place themselves. And one of the most successful things we've done over the last year or so has been to introduce the food waste recycling scheme, which, as well as increasing our recycling rates, has delivered significant climate change benefits as well. There's been quite a lot of discussion about active travel, so I'm not going to talk in lots of detail. And if Dean's still here, he can talk about this at length. But we have been successful in securing some active travel funding, and the first phase of that has enabled us to put in quite a number of new cycle stands and facilities. And we've just been notified that we've been successful with our second round bid, which will enable us to do more work to improve our cycling infrastructure and also footways as well. Local plan review, obviously the first phase of the consultation is in progress, and as you know, there's a very strong environmental focus within that local plan review, with climate change being quite a key theme, and that isn't necessarily the case for all local authorities, so I think it's really positive to see that as a key theme within the local plan review. We also committed, when we declared the emergency, that we would establish a climate change partnership, because we recognised to achieve the aspiration for the borough, we couldn't do that on our own. And I'll talk a little bit more about the partnership in a moment. Obviously, we're really pleased that Environment Scrutiny Committee have made climate change a key theme for their work programme this year, and really helpful to have your suggestions and input to shape the direction we're going in. We were also very keen that we involved members from across all parties in this work, because when we did the climate emergency, there was so much support right across the council for this initiative. So we have done 2 member drop-in sessions, and I know a number of members of the committee have attended those, and we've had some really good suggestions coming through from those as well. We also want to raise awareness amongst residents, so we've done a number of campaigns this year, which you might have seen. So we did quite a lot around World Environment Day, and actually that was when we launched My World Telford, which we've been speaking about earlier. And we also have done campaigns such as a recycling week, and also a campaign around reusable face masks in order to reduce single-use plastic pollution. The final thing that we've done to try and engage residents is that we have launched a new volunteering role called the Climate Change Champion, which either residents or schools can get involved with. And that's asking people to come forward to get involved in things like action days, to spread the word to their friends, families, communities about what they can do to tackle climate change, and also to use them very much as a sounding board as well. I mentioned the Climate Change Partnership. This has now been established, and as you can see on the slide there, we've got about 20 different organisations who are part of the main partnership. It's a very well attended, well supported group, and the chair of that group rotates, so it's not a council led partnership, it's very much a community partnership. And very early on, the partnership agreed that their key priority was going to be to develop an action plan for the borough. And in order to do that, because it's such a broad topic, as you know yourselves from discussing it at the meetings, they have divided into 6 thematic subgroups, and those are listed on the slide. And each one of those is chaired again by a community organisation, not by the council, although the council are involved with the different groups. And what we've been able to do by having the thematic subgroups is we've been able to involve a lot of other organisations in this work, because there are organisations that are very interested in transport as a theme, but they perhaps are not so interested in, for example, agriculture. So it means that we've been able to broaden the engagement that we've been able to have. That plan is well in development, and our target is to have a draft plan completed sort of by the end of January, with a view to then doing some public consultation around that plan. So just on the subject of consultation, I mentioned earlier that in the resident survey, we were able to ask residents about their views on climate change. We had a really good response to the survey. About 5,500 people took part. I should say that the full results from the survey will be coming to Cabinet in January, so you are getting a bit of a sneak preview tonight. But given that you wanted to discuss tonight actions to go into the plan, we thought it was quite helpful to share it in advance. So the first thing that we asked residents was about how concerned are they about climate change, and you can see here that they were asked to do that on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not concerned at all and 10 being extremely concerned. And about a quarter of residents said that they were at 10, extremely concerned, and you can see that 2/3 of residents said they were 7+, in terms of a level of concern. So I think that really shows why it's so important that this is a priority in the council plan, and why we declared the climate emergency, because it is something that residents are generally very concerned about. We also asked residents about what they do to take action around climate change, and we asked them what they did regularly, and we defined regularly as once a week or more. And I hope you can see that, but I will circulate the slide so that you can have a look through as well. You can see that the most popular activity that people did weekly or more was recycling, followed by buying environmentally friendly products. There were some other things that people didn't do so often, such as cycling to work or walking to work, but the orange blocks there are what people would consider doing, and it shows that there is quite an appetite to do more of that. So this is going to be really useful in terms of any campaigns and work that we do with the community, to understand not necessarily just what people are doing now, but what they're willing to consider doing in future. We then went on to ask people about longer term action that they were taking, and asked them what they'd already done, and again, what would they consider doing. And you can see there that the most common thing that people said they'd already done was fitting wall or loft insulation. But interestingly, there was still a good sort of fifth of people who hadn't done that and would consider doing it. So definitely that sort of fuel poverty work, the work to improve insulation of homes, is something we can really push on and promote. And the council has just promoted a fuel poverty officer, so that's going to be really useful. And there was a proportion of people that said they couldn't do that because they were living in rented accommodation, but they were still quite interested in it. So I think that is something we should focus on. Interestingly, some of the other things, there was quite small percentages of people doing them currently, such as purchasing an electric vehicle or installing solar panels on their houses. But you can see the orange blocks there, the two on the left, that there's, again, a lot of interest and an appetite amongst residents to actually look at those sort of initiatives. We also gave people the opportunity to make suggestions about what they thought should be done to tackle climate change. And we had it was over 2,000 comments that have all been individually read and coded. So this on this slide is very much a summary, and we will obviously go through in some detail to read verbatim what people have said. A lot of the comments focused around housing and commercial building improvements. There was an interest in solar schemes for householders and community energy schemes. Changes to planning policy was raised quite a lot, so very relevant for the local plan review. People were interested in more recycling. Interestingly, your topic that you've discussed here around specialist bins on the go recycling, there was quite a lot of support for that, and recycling being available at more locations. There was a lot of interest in electric and green vehicles, including public transport, charging infrastructure, and improvements for active travel. Education featured very strongly. I think definitely a sense that people see children and young people as the future, and it's very, very important that we get that education right, both for children and adults. And there was a lot of support for enhancing green space, and interestingly, quite a theme around allotments and buying and eating local food, supporting local businesses, sustainable food, etc. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of what local residents are doing and what they think about climate change. Moving forward, there's a number of actions that are in our existing plan that are in progress that I just wanted to update you about as well. So in terms of retrofitting of buildings, I mentioned we've done some buildings. We've got another 8 in the pipeline, and the next one is the Place, and that's starting next week on the 20th of December. We've also started to look now at our heat as well as electricity, and decarbonising heat's really important. The government has launched a public sector decarbonisation fund, and we've bid into that successfully. And we've got some funding to do a feasibility study on 7 of our buildings to look at the possibility of installing heat pumps. We've also had funding to do some work to look at expanding our existing district heat network, but also to decarbonise that heat network. So that's really, really good that that's coming forward as well. We've been looking at our land holdings to see whether there's any sites that could be suitable for renewable energy generation, and we've found 2 that we think may have potential for that. So in January, we will be working with Western Power Distribution to look at the grid connection aspects of that, because that's very critical to bring those schemes forward. Another one that we are bringing forward in February, which was in the plan for 5 years from now, so we've brought this forward, is natural cooling in our new data centre. It doesn't sound very exciting, but actually it's quite innovative, and it's something that we will be following in the footsteps of Facebook and Google on. So we're in good company on this one, and it's a very simple concept. So instead of relying on mechanical cooling, we take the air in from outside the data centre and use that to chill the water for the air conditioning system. It saves us money, and it also reduces our energy consumption. So I'm really pleased that that is coming forward. We've talked a bit about offices, take on board fully everything everyone said, but obviously we have been having a lot of our staff work from home. So what we've been doing is making sure that when we need to use office accommodation, we're being efficient about that. We're not opening all the offices up for very few people. We've got our offices closed over Christmas, which we haven't done for many years. And again, that will help with our energy usage. And we're also starting a longer term accommodation review to see what we need going forward. And I think, as Carolyn says, that will end up being a kind of hybrid model. But one thing that we have found through COVID and the changing patterns of work is that we've significantly reduced our business mileage. So we have set now very challenging targets for all our service areas to reduce their business mileage by 30% from April next year, and that will have a significant impact. We've talked quite a lot in the past here about housing and our role as a housing provider through our housing company New Place, and I'm really pleased to say that we have got planning consent now for our Southwater Way site, and that will be starting work early next year. And all those units will have EV charging points and solar panels. And we are also shortly going to be submitting an application for another site at Donington Wood Way. That again will have those features as standard, but we're going to go a little bit further with that site. We're going to have enhanced fabric of those properties. We're going to be having time and temperature controlled heating systems, wastewater heat recovery, and we're also going to have a sort of small pilot within that scheme of 15 properties that we're going to trial battery storage with, and also building those to future home standards as well. And we're going to then monitor and look at the impact of that pilot with a view to then hopefully being able to incorporate those features into future schemes that we bring forward. So I think that's a really good sort of statement of intent in terms of the council's own position as a housing provider. Very briefly, just touching on some of the biodiversity side of things. I mentioned the scheme we'd piloted this year, and we've got a number of other projects in the pipeline for 2021. And we've also submitted 4 different bids for funding to support those habitat enhancement schemes through various grants that are available. And we're working with the River Severn Partnership around some habitat creation schemes as well. So there's lots happening around that. In terms of actions that we're considering for the plan for next year, I should say that these are very much a work in progress. They're ideas that are being explored, and we'd really welcome your thoughts on them. And obviously we will need to work through that and the resource implications of some of these before we bring them forward in February. But we wanted to kind of share at an early stage some of our initial thoughts so that you could engage with it in advance. So we want to continue the work we've been doing, engaging residents and communicating with them. And actually an idea that came out of one of the member drop-in sessions that we had, I think Gilly, you were at that one, was the idea of doing a New Year campaign, very much around encouraging people to be greener in 2021. And what we want to do is provide both residents and organisations with some sort of top tip suggestions of things that you could do if you want to start 2021 being greener. So we'll be pushing that out from January. Another idea that we're very keen on exploring next year is the idea of a climate assembly. A number of councils have gone down this route, either for a cross-section of residents or specifically for young people. And the idea behind the climate assembly approach is that residents focus on a particular topic, and they hear from experts and have information about that topic, and then they are able to debate it and actually put forward suggestions, having sort of learnt more about that subject. Because as we know, climate change can get quite technical quite quickly and get quite involved. Lots of data to absorb, so it's a really, really effective way of engaging residents, and I think we're quite interested in exploring that, but would really like to hear your views on that. Obviously, a lot of our residents think we should be doing more around education. There is an Eco Schools programme, which is a national programme, and I think there are schools in Telford and Wrekin that are very actively involved in that, but there are others that aren't, and we want to, as the local authority, try and facilitate that and try and promote that programme more. And we would like to do in probably in September, we've got a date penciled in September in the town park, a sort of a green day, an environmental event probably aimed at families, where people can come along. Our partners from the Telford and Wrekin Partnership would attend and promote all the different things that you can do to reduce your own carbon footprint as a resident. Renewable energy generation, we're doing quite a bit within the council, but we want to promote it in the community. So we're quite interested in the idea of group buying schemes for residents, where the idea being that residents could register as part of a group buying scheme, and then they'd go into effectively an online auction and could buy their solar panels at a reduced price. And we know there is an appetite for this, so we think that would be a good process, and a number of councils have joined such schemes. We're also interested in the idea of salary sacrifice scheme for employees. We mentioned this earlier. If we've got our employees working at home, we do have a responsibility to try and help them to make their homes A, as energy efficient as possible, but B, to encourage them, if they want to put solar panels or batteries into their homes to enable them to get the benefits of that. And we would also like to work over the next 12 months on a large-scale community renewable energy scheme, particularly with schools, but also other community partners. We do want to look at extending trees for TW. We are trying to source more UK trees because we had so much interest in it. If we can carry on into January and February during the planting season, we'd like to. If not, it will be autumn of next year. We've also done a little bit of work around verge rewilding, so reduced cutting and wildflower planting. It's pretty popular with residents. It's good from a biodiversity and carbon storage point of view. So we're looking at whether we could do more of that. And another idea that's come from members, and I think this was an idea that was sort of talked a lot about at full council, was around sustainability of food. There is an initiative that you may have come across called Sustainable Food Cities or Sustainable Food Places. And we really like this because it kind of covers a number of aspects of food. So it's about local food production, reduced food miles, reduced food waste, growing of food, but also it tackles things like food poverty. So there's quite a public health angle to this. So we're still exploring it as an idea. And again, we're really interested in Scrutiny's thoughts on that. But we do think that the food aspect of climate change is perhaps one we haven't focused on as much previously, and we're quite interested in bringing that into our plan for next year. Equally, we want to include a little bit more on resources and waste in our updated plan. We're obviously going to be featuring the piloting of the on-the-go recycling bins, which is an idea put forward by Scrutiny, and I understand that's coming forward as a recommendation. And we're also interested in more reuse schemes. We obviously have people like Revive in the borough that do excellent work on household items, but there are schemes such as Warp It that apply to office and commercial reuse. So companies give away or loan out office furniture, IT equipment. So we're quite interested in that as an idea. And finally, we are looking at quality standards, and there's a couple to mention specifically. The first one is an environmental management standard, which replaces the old ISO 14001, if anyone's familiar with that. And we're obviously keen that our suppliers, that we start to ask them for that, because that provides an accredited verification that they are they have those carbon neutral credentials, and we can audit that. But also, as we move forward in our journey to become carbon neutral, we are a supplier and we provide services to others. We would like to be able to gain this accreditation ourselves, to be able to show that we equally have verified our performance. And the other one that we are looking at is a standard called Investors in the Environment, which is quite similar to Investors in People, but it has an environmental focus. And what we like about this is it's quite a structured approach to make sure that we as an employer, as an organisation, are doing the correct things. And again, there's that verification that we are putting our own house in order. So that's one that we are currently looking at as well. So we're very interested in your thoughts on those ideas, and also any other suggestions. This is an absolutely ideal time to make them, because we are literally working on the updated plan as we speak. I will pause there for questions.
Thank you for that, Fliss. That's I think that's really, really helpful, and hopefully I think that will frame a really positive debate and ideas. So I'll open it up if anybody's got any comments or questions in regards to what Fliss has presented, but also any kind of ideas as well going forward for the climate change plan, obviously ahead of going to Cabinet. I think the reason it's on tonight's meeting is because as Chair, I felt it was really important that as a committee we had the opportunity to feed into it ahead of it going to Cabinet. So I think it's really important that we utilise the time tonight so that we can put forward any suggestions kind of ahead of it going through the process. So I'll open it up if anybody wants to kick off. I suspect Councillor Nelson will want to. I can see him slightly indicating no. Oh, go on, Councillor Nelson.
Well, no, it is a problem, Chair, because of course in the parish council I always make sure I go last, because that way you sum up. Whereas here it's jumping in, isn't it? Thank you. I mean, thank you, Telford Wrekin Council. Actually, credit where it's due, and thank you, Fliss, for that very comprehensive indeed review with a lot of very positive things, and there's in fact too much really to pick up on each individual area and each individual strand. So if I can just pick out one or two things, but this is not exhaustive or conclusive, because really you have covered a lot of ground, and these aren't necessarily in any brilliant order. Certainly recycle on the go, yes, I've got some enthusiasm about them myself, but what I would say now, I'm not naming any names, but the officer engagement that I'm experiencing in that project is really high, and I would like to just praise that. Not mention any names, but I've been very impressed indeed, and long may it continue. So thank you for that. And also it presents, even from the analysis done today, I think there's a tremendous opportunity there to make a very, very big difference. I'm naturally pleased to see that we're looking at extending the availability of allotments, and that we're looking at a local food policy. What is one to say? I think these are tremendous opportunities, particularly for the nature of our borough and our ceremonial county, which is such a powerful food producing area. So there must be great opportunities for us. You know, we're not an urban desert. On the contrary, we've got a lot of food produced locally already, and there's a lot to be worked with there. I'm very interested in and encouraged to hear that the council's using New Place, irrespective of what one might think about New Place, but to use New Place to pilot more climate positive methods of construction and heating and so on. Either battery storage, I was very interested indeed, because to be honest, we'd all have solar power and batteries if we could afford it, but we can't. But if we could, we would. It makes a lot of sense. And that you're also looking to plan to future home standard. And what I would ask is, can the council start to explore how we expect and require the same standards of private developers? who are going to make a bundle of money, millions, if not billions, out of building thousands and thousands of houses. So there is money available, and one sees the profit margins of some of the big house builders, and I do hope my personal pension is invested in them. Who knows? Who knows? But the point is, the developers have resources as well. If the council doesn't require them to do more than the minimum, they won't. And this has been a sort of plea for quite some time. I'm not really qualified to discuss climate assemblies, because in the past they've often been proposed by people because they didn't like the answer they were getting from representative Democrats. So just, I'd need to think more deeply about what the role was and the expectations on the part of people taking part. But the public nature of a climate assembly and the engagement opportunity and the transparency of discussion are all very powerful things. I wish our discussions here could be more transparent. It's difficult in this electronic medium. And well, a couple of other things. This is a purely personal point. Salary sacrifice is very beneficial if you're on higher rate tax. It's significantly less beneficial if you're on lower rate tax. So the people who already got a much higher pay get a much higher benefit. Now, with my equalities head on, I've never been happy with that. And I'd just like to mention that. How do you leverage? Maybe what you should be looking at is an average 30% for everyone. But what is, I'll just mention that if I may. But lastly, in terms of and Val touched on this quite strongly, the working from home opportunity to mean people no longer drive for 2 hours a day, just producing emissions and consuming their lives. And this is something that I'm sure we all heard during the lockdown. People said their lives had been transformed because they weren't in the car for hours, and instead, even if the same amount of time at work, they had 2 hours with the kids. Now, speaking as someone who didn't see my children when they were tiny for about 3 years, because I left when they were asleep and I got home when they were asleep, I will never get that time back, and I bitterly regret it. So, to facilitate that working from home, broadband is absolutely key. Fast, powerful broadband for everyone. Now, I know the council is aware of this, but what I would say to the council is we've also learned that broadband is really important for education. Because if you're going to learn at home, you've got to have access to good internet. So there's this dual strand with regard to broadband, that it isn't just about, people who can work from home and lucky them, where they're sipping a latte and they're on their laptop. It's also they're young people learning at home as well. But overall, thank you very much indeed. Very, very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Healy, did you want to respond to any of that? Your hand went up and then went down, so I wasn't sure.
Shall I wait? Let's see what other comments there are, and then if I can add in anything at the end, probably the best thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Offland?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work gone into this by officers, and especially around recycling. I think one of my bugbears has always been, we recycle loads at home. I go out somewhere and you're like, well, I either take this home and recycle, or do you know that other organisations are recycling, when you go out for meals and things like that. So I think it's really good. And like I said, anything to reduce anything on climate change is a bonus, I think, and credit to everybody who's put things together.
Thank you for that, Councillor Offland. Councillor Holt?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that was a great presentation. Thank you. It was really thorough. There's a lot of things to be thinking about, a lot of things to be taking forward. I just wanted to ask about, I love that the tree scheme has taken off so well, and that we're going to continue it forward. I wonder if we could concentrate on other wildlife areas as well, other environments such as the wetlands or the Shropshire Plains, and bring the different kind of environments that we need in our area to the public.
Fliss, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to say a couple of things on that. So absolutely agree with you. I think it's often when we talk about carbon storage, people tend to automatically think about woodland, and we've heard a lot about woodland, and we're quite well blessed with woodland in Telford, but we need to do more. But actually other habitats can be really beneficial as well, and I think Carolyn touched on this earlier. So we do have a commitment that we will be bringing forward schemes on sort of 70 hectares of our land, which will be habitat enhancement rather than tree planting, and it will be a mix of different habitats. So there's quite a lot planned around that, and as I say, the government have put quite a lot of funding out this year around these sort of schemes, which we are actively bidding for, and that will help as well. And we've got some of the Potters landfill funding as well, and we can match fund that. So we're in quite a good position around that. So those schemes are being planned out as we speak. So hopefully next time we come, more updates on that.
Brilliant. I've got a whole catalogue of different ideas. Would you rather me say them now or email them? What would be the best best way?
Say them now, I think. It depends how many there are.
Well, yeah, I try. Basically, I sat down and tried to brainstorm some different ideas. Some I suspect probably we're already doing in one format or another, and perhaps I'm not aware of. Some might be off the wall, and you might tell me they're not feasible, but none. I'll power through them. I think what we're doing in terms of council buildings and kind of refitting them really positive. And I think kind of it links to those buildings which perhaps aren't feasible for that, about whether kind of living roofs on some buildings could be useful in terms of habitats. So for those buildings which can't have solar panels or whatever it might be, that could be a different option. And I think that's something which, you know, we could probably work with other organisations like schools and so on, who might be potentially more interested in that than solar panels or kind of other energy sources. Another question, this is a question rather than a comment, but where are we in terms of the parish and town council toolkit? Because I know we talked about that in one of our very early meetings, but it'd be interesting to see where we are and how can we bring parish and town councils along with us on the journey, rather than them playing catch up. It'd be brilliant for them to be kind of doing it at the same pace, so we're all supporting one another. So that was my second point. There is quite a lot, I do apologise. Another one was about kind of licensing for taxis, and whether we can either incentivise or change licensing in some way. I am not a licensing expert, I'll say that now, but whether can we incentivise taxis becoming electric vehicles or more sustainable in some way? Can we do a piece of work to kind of work alongside taxi companies? And I suspect that would be a Shropshire-wide issue potentially. A cozier search engine, I know I've spoken to you about this, Fliss. If you don't know, there's a search engine called a cozier. It works exactly the same as Google, but for every search you do, basically you after a certain amount you plant trees, so you can offset your own carbon emissions if you wish through search engines. And I know you said there was some kind of difficulties in kind of doing that as a whole council approach, but is there something we could be doing to promote it? I don't know, whether it's with partners, with schools, or whatever it might be. But even if it's not a wider thing, at least the 12 of us in this room can go use a cozier and start planting trees. I've mentioned about partnering with an electric charging vehicle company before. I've mentioned that one, so I won't go into that one. I've mentioned it. Really positive about New Place. You know, I think, and I know I've banged on about New Place, about leading by example, so I think that's a really positive thing that we really are doing exactly what we preach. And also what you were saying about kind of working on like quality standards and kind of the suppliers, because I think it almost needs there to be a change in our procurement so that we preference contractors on a carbon emissions basis. And I know obviously that's got to be weighed up alongside other considerations. So, how many children in care do they take on, and all those other considerations. It's not a case it's just that one by itself, but if it could be kind of weighted within our procurement process, whether that could be something to explore. What you were saying about food, I think, is really, really positive. And as you say, it's not something we've explored kind of considerably before, but whether within our own cafe, so within Cafe Go, within schools, and obviously the catering within schools, can we make it so, obviously what you were saying about higher welfare meat or travelling less, and whether we could introduce kind of a veggie day once a week in schools and within our cafes, because obviously just in terms of eating vegetarian would have a big impact as well. So maybe that's something we could explore. And then I think for me as well, it's interesting that, I think, as you say, with that residents survey, there's a lot of engagement, there's a lot of interest, but then there's that it's doubled with the concern about education, and whether kind of just as a starting place, whether we could do kind of training or education for all councillors and for all employees, because I think it's really interesting that there's an appetite for it, but not necessarily there's that level of knowledge. And I know from myself that it's a case you have to research things, and actually if you can just deliver a toolkit which we can take on board and go off in our lives, that would be a lot easier for a lot of people, because I think there is a passion to do it, but not necessarily the time to find out what you can do. And then last, I'm sorry, I've banged on a lot, but I'll stop. This is my last one, about whether, obviously the My Telford app is really, really popular. It really helps in terms of reporting environmental issues. And obviously, I think apps are going to be the main form of communication going forward. Kind of whether to create an app to incentivise kind of, maybe it's environmental cleanups or kind of something which helps the environment, whatever it might be, but an app which is aimed at children and young people to kind of incentivise climate action. So it could be, if you have done 5 litter picks in your local area, you get free tickets to go ice skating. So we link up our own council services to doing something positive in the local environment. And then obviously there's all that kind of creating sense of place, which is linked to that, and local ownership of green spaces. And I suppose it's that idea of, I know my mum always says about you take back glass bottles to get some money or whatever when you were little. It's like a modern idea of that incentivise, you do something good for the environment, you get something back as a result, and things which are within our power to do so as a council. So they were my ideas, and now I'll stop.
Gilly, your mum remembers her mum taking the bottles back?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, just like
yeah.
I remember taking them back. Okay.
Don't tell her.
Oh, it's noted.
Councillor Healy?
I used to take the bottles back. That's the age difference between me and you, Gilly. The Corona of all things, Corona pop van used to come round every week. So I think really good suggestions and really good queries as well from Scrutiny members. So thank you for that. I think some of the things and I think what we want to do is strengthen our procurement approach, as Fliss mentioned, and as you picked up on, Gilly. I just wanted to mention that we are already doing some of that. So there's already been criteria put into our procurement process around, our suppliers' attempts, and the work they're doing to kind of reduce their carbon footprint. What the accreditation standards will do is obviously put a stronger framework around that. So we're sort of not starting from not doing any of that. We're already doing some of it already. I mean, interestingly, Fliss and I, the last couple of days, have been having a discussion about school menus and sort of cafes, although the cafe's not open at the moment, but our sort of food offer in terms of things like veggie days, vegan days. So that sort of thing is something that's actually being planned. Obviously, for schools, we work with the schools in terms of agreeing menus with them, but we can supply that, and we just want to encourage that take up from schools as well, so that we have that. It's not forced on people, but it's just there, you know, and at least have one day a week where you kind of perhaps have a meat-free day to encourage some changes of behaviour. A number of things that Tim mentioned, I think, I know the issue of house building is and sustainable standards. It's a really difficult one, because I agree with you. House builders are raking profits in, but when they put in a planning application, they put in their viability reports that say that they're not, and that they can't meet the kind of things we want to ask them to do. And under the current planning regs, we can't obligate them to do, you know, the kind of things we want them to in terms of sustainability. So really it needs that kind of governmental change. Obviously the build standards, government has set a target for changing those, but that's a few years away. So I think personally, I'd like to see us all lobbying for that to be brought forward, so that we can actually do that sooner, because when we try to have those negotiations with developers currently, they say it's not viable, they can't deliver it, and actually they don't have to. And if we try to force them, we would end up in a planning inquiry and probably lose. So you know, it is a real challenge to try to get that, which is why we're doing it ourselves on New Place, where we've got some level of control, because it's our own project. And similarly around broadband, I mean, again, we've obviously done a lot of work in terms of broadband access. I think it's 96% of the borough has broadband access. But obviously the other issue around broadband is clearly cost. You know, it's still something you have to buy. And of course, there's been a debate, you know, sort of, I suppose, towards the last election around whether broadband provision should be something that's a public service, that's something that people actually are entitled to, whether there's a different model, whether it's about giving a benefit for low-income families to be able to access broadband more cheaply. But at the moment, we're in a very commercial environment in terms of the way that broadband is delivered. So again, that we can set the provision up, and we have done for most of the borough, but it's still a commercial market in terms of whether people can afford to then access it. So I think there's still some challenges around some of that, and some things that are slightly outside of things that the council directly can resolve, but we can certainly try to lobby and seek change on a national scale. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Healy. Fliss?
Yes, thank you for those suggestions. There's some really interesting ones in there, and definitely some that we haven't considered, so we'll definitely have a look at those. Just was going to update on the parish and town council. So I mentioned the partnership earlier, and we do have a subgroup of the partnership now for town and parish councils, and we've got a number of, how many, Harge is it? I'm going to put her on the spot now.
It's about 16, 17 members we have, and it's growing.
So it's quite well supported, and as Harge says, more town and parish councils getting involved. We have shared the toolkit with the town and parish councils. The other thing that we, I think, have spoken about here is the fact that there is various grant funding opportunities for town and parish councils, and one of those grant funds previously in Telford and Wrekin, there hadn't been any take up of it, so we've done quite a lot of promotion, and Harge and the team have been promoting that quite actively, and I'm pleased to say we've now got applications coming forward. We've got about £600,000 worth of schemes in the borough now coming forward, so that's really positive, because it's really frustrating when there's that funding available and just people weren't aware and weren't accessing it. So, you know, but I think we are kind of seeing a little bit of a barrier for some organisations in terms of those funding streams. There is always a match element, and some of the smaller organisations aren't able to fund the other part of it. So that is a bit of a barrier that, you know, Carolyn and I have been chatting about what we could possibly do to address that. But it's really positive to see that engagement, and some of those applications have come forward from town and parish council. So I think I should say thank you to Harge as well tonight, because she's been juggling all this with doing track and trace for COVID. So we have been moving forward, but at the same time as helping with the COVID response as well. So well done to Harge and Claire, who've been wearing two hats very much over the last couple of months in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just well done to kind of the team as a whole in terms of kind of carrying this agenda forward, despite very obvious kind of constraints this year. And I think, with this kind of thing, you can always say, oh, well, we want to do this, we want to achieve this. But actually, the fact that we have made so much progress is a really positive thing. And I think something we can be proud of. And obviously Scrutiny's only played a small part in that. But the fact that, last committee meeting, we made that recommendation about kind of recycling bins within the borough absolutely reflects the desires of local residents as well. So I think we're in a really good position going into 2021 because we've kind of kept the heat up in regards to the agenda. So we're in a good place to kind of, hopefully, in a slightly better context, kind of press forward on these things. So thank you to kind of everybody within the team of keeping it up and keeping it as a priority despite other constraints. So we do appreciate it as a scrutiny committee as well. Are there any further comments or questions in regards to that agenda item before we move on? Oh, Fliss?
Yeah, it was just one final question, really, because I know when we met to discuss this agenda item, Jay, you were wondering whether the Scrutiny Committee would actually like to get involved in taking any of those new pieces of work forward, given that some of them are new, and if we did move forward with them or are in exploring them, because obviously, as I said, we're still with some of them, like the sustainable food one, for example, that's one we're finding out about and exploring and are interested in, but there's quite a bit of work to do, I think, to kind of work through the feasibility of that one. So if there were any of the ideas that we've talked about or any of the ideas you've put forward yourselves that you'd be interested in working with us on, whether it's, the whole committee or a subgroup of the committee, we would be very open to working with Scrutiny on that if you would like to.
Absolutely. Go on, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, please forgive me. Three very brief things. One, I think I heard that you said that in one of our areas of grassland we were cutting hay. Does that mean a later cut in the season and only one cut per season? Proper hay, not silage.
I think what we've been.
It's an excellent thing.
Sorry.
It's an excellent thing.
What we've been doing is where we've already got so it's meadow cutting. So where we've got so it is technically hay, but it's not kind of it's obviously it's mixed. It's wildflowers and wild grasses. So where we've got a species rich meadow, we obviously to maintain that you need to do an annual cut, and sometimes we'll do a spring cut as well, depending on your species mix. And remove, and what we're doing is using those cuttings then to hay strew, basically to seed other grassland areas to improve the diversity, because actually that improvement of the diversity and creation of more wildflower meadows then captures more carbon. So that's what we're doing.
No, that's excellent. The reason I've raised it is that cutting hay rather than silage is one of the reasons why our bird population has decreased so much, because hay provided the habitat, because the cut was after the nesting season, whereas silage you cut twice and it cuts into nesting season. That was that point. Very brief. So it's a good thing. The second one was in terms of verge rewilding. I mean, nature doesn't know it's a verge. It just says it's green land potentially. This is a very fine point, but can be very, very significant for residents. That the fine line between letting a verge grow and neglect can be very, very fine. Okay, and part of well-being is absence of neglect. Yeah, if a place looks neglected, it can be as green as you like, but it lowers people's spirits. So that's not a criticism either. I think leaving a proportion of verge and a wider proportion green is very good, but just wants to be telegraphed really, really clearly that it's been done deliberately. Okay, so it doesn't appear as neglect. For pollination, leaving weeds in gutters is a good thing, But for the well-being of the people who drive along thinking this is uncared for, it's a bad thing. So that's it. And that. Oh yeah, and very lastly, Councillor Healy, if you get a 120 housing estate with no public open space in that housing estate, like we're going to get in Newport, that's on council land, can we please have one house with solar panels on the roof, just as a signal? Okay, I take your point about viability, but the public will find it very hard to understand in that context. There's 120 houses, no public open space, and it's land the council owned, and there isn't one house that's been built with a heat pump. So the signal element, can we consider that signal element, please?
I think that's fair enough, but I'm not familiar with the site, Councillor Nelson, but obviously there's also, we ask a number of other things from developers. So in terms of open space, one of the things that I'm pushing, because that's another part of my brief, is that we have a strategic approach to open space contributions. And so where we have got existing open spaces, we may not ask for open space on the site, we may ask for off-site contributions to enhance the existing, and I don't know in that case whether that's what we've done.
That is the case. No, Councillor Healy, that is the case. That's exactly the argument's been made. But that brings us back to, for Bloor homes on this site that's council-owned land, their viability is going to be pretty good. So I'll just mention that, that's all. Can we consider that, even a show home, do one as a signal?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Phyllis, did you want to come back in, or was your hand just...
Yes, I was just going to comment on Councillor Nelson's point about the verges. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that's the debate we're having around to what extent we should do it, because there's a number of things at play here, one of which is the point you've made, and also kind of safety as well. So sometimes we're cutting verges because they're close to a junction and the visibility aspect. So it's not something we'll be doing absolutely everywhere, and you know, we've done a certain amount of it. I suppose it's exploring the art of the possible and trying to strike that right balance. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Councillor Nelson, did you want to come back in? No. In terms of kind of the committee's involvement with one of those kind of new areas to pursue, I'd be very interested in kind of being involved in that. I can see Vanessa nodding along, which I hope also means that Vanessa would be interested in kind of being a part of that as well. Is it a case, Fliss, that you'd like us to kind of commit to it tonight, or would you like us to kind of email you after the meeting if we are involved, and potentially we can do it as, it doesn't have to be the whole committee, it could be kind of more informal kind of fact finding, if that would be helpful?
It's up to you, Chair, whatever works for the committee. It's you know, I think we've kind of brought some initial ideas to share. Obviously the report's coming through to Cabinet in February, so if members have other ideas as well that they want to share kind of between now and, I'm looking at Harge now in terms of timescales, probably middle of January would be probably the latest in terms of just kind of it coming through on a cycle. Additional ideas, we can certainly consider those probably through to that sort of timescale. And if you want to come back to us in terms of perhaps working on a piece of work moving forward, then that would be fine.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll be in touch, I think, and hopefully we can kind of move forward on that. But I think we, as a committee, we really appreciate the opportunity to feed into something before it's gone to Cabinet as well. And I think that's really important as Scrutiny that we're involved in that. So we do appreciate the opportunity. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Harge, Fliss. I think Dean. No, Dean's gone. But thank you for staying. And I know it's been quite a long meeting, so we do appreciate it. And we'll swiftly move on to agenda item 6. So if you do wish to escape, you're more than welcome to, or you can stay. It's entirely up to you. So work programme review. So I think we discussed this at the last meeting. In terms of kind of meetings going into the new year, will be obviously January is very kind of dominated by the budget. So I suspect our first meeting will be in February. But we're going to be looking at the waste and recycling contract and the grounds and cleansing contract, because we're coming up to kind of an annual review. So we'll be monitoring those two in terms of how successful they've been. So we'll be looking at that. Also, we'll have an update on the plastic free, kind of what we've been doing as a council, because we kind of looking at that as an annual, where we've got to. And then also, obviously, local plan is going to be a major topic in the new year. So I think the plan is for us to be working alongside the communities, Scrutiny on some joint working, looking at the local plan from an environmental perspective as well. So I think that will probably take us through the first few months of the new year in terms of what we'll be looking at as a Scrutiny committee. Just as a heads up, in the new year, there'll be an email circulating in terms of new items for our work programme. So for 2021, 2022. So if and when that arrives, if we can kind of put forward any ideas, that would be really helpful. Obviously, that will also be circulated to town and parish councils and so on, the normal kind of partners who feed into that. But if you've got any kind of ideas, obviously that's an opportunity to feed them in as well. So just as a heads up, that will be coming soon. But aside from that, there's not much more in terms of the work programme. So I'm sure Kieran will keep us updated in terms of kind of meeting dates. But that's the programme for the new year, the start of the new year anyway. So we'll get the dates out as soon as possible. I hope. Obviously, it's officer time dependent as well. So that's everything for work programme. Is there any questions or anything on that item? Are we all happy with that work programme? Super. I'll take that as in the middle. In regards to kind of the items which we've discussed today, if you are kind of interested in feeding into any of them or kind of working on any of those, if there's one which in particular kind of strikes your fancy, it's something you really want to get your teeth into, if you could just drop me an email, and then we can see kind of best way of working kind of going forward on those. I think that's probably the best way of doing it, and then I can keep in touch with Fliss as well about the way forward on that. Shares update, yeah, I think I've done it. There's not much more to add really in terms of we've got our programme for the next few months, I think, and that's really positive. And I think the opportunity tonight to feed into that's been really good. So if there is anything, as always, feel free to drop me an email and we can kind of work forward on that. And without further ado, if there's no further comments or questions, we can close the meeting. Super. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance tonight. Thank you for all your ideas as well. I'm sure Fliss and Councillor Healy have found it a really helpful, I hope, opportunity to kind of get our views as well. So if I don't see you before, I hope you all have a very safe and restful and happy Christmas. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas all. Take care.